Всем добрый день.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Dr. Leitman. Hello. And we're continuing with our course, the post-coronavirus era, and today we're going to talk about the influence of society over a person's consciousness. We'll go over the materials of our previous show. We talked about the 4 factors that influence the development, a person's development. The first factor being the genetic material, substance that we have received from our forefathers. The second factor is the unchanging substances like our traits. The third factor are different substances or conditions that change under the influence of the surrounding, different things that a person consumes, love to his homeland, different factors. And there are different things like crises, viruses, and things that are not directly, that we can control, but that are revealed in different extreme situations. Now, we say that my environment today is who I am tomorrow. Do you agree with this assumption? Of course, we have to agree with that. We see how the environment influences a person. A person's born as a small, helpless, wild animal. And gradually, under the influence of the environment, his parents, afterwards broader and broader circles that are influencing him, he goes through all the different educational phases, school, backyard, friends, and so on. He watches an enormous amount of shows on TV, on his computer, and as a result, he becomes what we see today in society. Were he not to receive all of these influences from the environment, then he would have been completely unfit for life in our world. If we say that we exist in our ego, this is our nature, and our ego works according to the program of maximum pleasure, minimum effort, then probably within this framework we do have some kind of choice, but this choice is not free. Meaning, there is still some kind of framework. I can say that freely I'm choosing to drink tea or coffee. This is my own free choice, but still my decision was already taken by some predetermined conditions. True? Actually, yes. Could there be such a situation where a person's free, he chooses freely? No, nothing. This doesn't exist in a person's life. The only thing that we can do, as we learn from the wisdom of Kabbalah, we can influence the environment that shapes us. Meaning, we can't directly influence ourselves, but if we influence the environment, meaning we choose the environment for it to be one and not another, and by environment, this could be plenty of different factors, but actually, the way they influence, impact us, this is how we're going to be. What does it mean to choose an environment? There are rich people that send their kids off to school to Oxford. They choose their environment. Is this free choice? To some extent, this is choosing. Okay, but still it is in some kind of framework, within a framework. Can a person neutrally choose? How can he neutrally choose something? Coming from what substances, parameters? His initial parameters, what are they? He has to have some. This is why I'm asking, what does it mean that a person chooses his environment? It's not choice either. Yes, but still, out of several options, it is some kind of choice, and maybe we don't know why did he choose one and not another. It was so hinted to him from within by certain conditions, by hormones, genes, and so on. his forefathers played some kind of a role here, but still, there's nothing new. Actually, we have no free choice. Our choice is only in, somehow, with the help of the environment, the correct environment, to direct ourselves at a more correct goal from all the possible ones. And if not, then not. I can even choose some other environment of criminals or something. And accordingly, I will set a completely different future for myself. This is what we wanted to ask about. We're talking about the complete influence of society over a person, and there are several examples that people sent me. First of all, it's the propaganda of the consumption society. Sure, a person has no free choice there. He has to go and buy, because these are the values that society give him, dictate to him. Public opinion influences people's consciousness. For example, there are different psychological exercises or tests when people look at some fake picture and enjoy it as if it were the original, or fake paintings, or a person drinks wine and he's told that this wine costs a few hundreds of dollars. It costs like $400, and he also enjoys it much more than an ordinary wine. For example, if I know someone who smokes, he starts smoking. Suppose a person starts smoking, the chances that I will start smoking rise by 61%, and so on. Do you agree with the assumption that first we form our environment and then it starts forming us? The question is, do we form our environment around us? There are many other factors: relatives, friends, the place I live, society, time. Everything. It pushes me to some kind of choice. But if there is free choice, then it's only in choosing your environment. And here we have to bring or educate a person up in a way that he'll know how to use this. Everything in our life is determined by a scale of values that is accepted by society, of course. But in its turn, these values, they are determined by our desires. Meaning, if we look at the history of the development of human desires, then there were periods when, in general, in society, there developed different desires for power, wealth, and so on. If our desires determine these values, then what's the way out? What kind of way do we have to change our values if it all depends on our desire? And our desire depends on on nature and what era are we living in, and so on. How can we change it? In every given moment in time, I can choose, nonetheless, a certain environment, group in which I will develop. And it will be maybe very different than other smaller societies, other groups that exist at the same time. There are people that choose some kind of profession, those that work on themselves according to a certain program, and they're very different. Society consists of many such mini societies, and they're completely unconnected. 90% of society, according to Maslow's pyramid of needs, they are on the level of basic needs. The need for family, sex, and safety. And if society is a consumeristic society, then in this regard, what can a person do? He doesn't want anything but to delight himself with, simple pleasures, natural pleasures. So, the question is, if we want to elevate society, their values, so he can direct himself toward that goal that society has, but his direction and advancement toward that goal will be relatively passive in relation to others. We see they're cholerics and sanguine and melancholic and phlegmatic. You can't change that. If this is a person's character structure that he got from nature, he can't really change himself. But sometimes you say that we have to raise a person to the level of he'll do it, only he'll do it at his own pace, within the framework of his desires. Yes, but these desires gradually, under the influence of society, will change. But the pace at which he'll advance in relation to the rest of society toward the same goal of society will be different. The pace will be different according to a person's character. We are sometimes or even always trying to change everything around us, meaning banks, leaders, partner in life, and eventually a person doesn't understand that the only thing that he can change is his attitude toward the world, nothing else. Our ego doesn't allow us to do it. To change myself, it means that I'm bad. I have to improve myself. Why should I change myself? Why should I improve myself? That's the hardest work. It demands a tremendous amount of effort, energy. Lowering myself in relation to something else. If I put some kind of goal in relation to others, I have to acknowledge that, first of all, I'm bad. And maybe even having to look at others and try to improve myself. It's very hard work for a person that has to do with lowering himself, which is against his own nature. That has to do with him needing to bend himself before society. It's not simple. Only if there is a tremendous goal set before a person, then he can force himself to be this way. Well, what we do when we study in the university or in some group, when we want to achieve some kind of goal and it's important for us, that's more important than simply laying on a couch. Everyone measures things according to the measure of his corruptedness. How can a person understand that what he sees in the world is a result of his uncorrected worldview, his uncorrected qualities? How can he see that? Well, this is not simple. This is if he regularly controls himself, examines himself, understands his reactions. He's engaged in self-analysis, self-examination, trying to make something more objective out of himself. Then, in that case, in the right society that also sets such an example of this kind of attitude of every person toward himself, then he can set himself this way to perceive reality, that he'll discern clearly that this is what I feel in my ego, that I have to constantly raise and correct, and this way I will see the world differently. So this is something that you can teach. It's not that certain people have certain qualities that they can look at themselves from the outside in. Yeah, but it's not simple. It's none of the people are really engaged in this. No people are really engaged in this. It's not a person's ordinary work on himself, where he acquires a certain profession, habits, and so on. But this is very determined direction to start and acquire a new worldview. And a new worldview, this is already a different condition, a person's different condition, called the attribute of bestowal, love of others, meaning to rework himself. It's very not simple. It's a completely different method. It's not changing yourself under the influence of some exercises or teachings, but it is really special exercises and a teaching that can lead a person to a point where he starts seeing the world through the eyes of others, like others see him. So for him, others are a mirror of himself. Yes, I understand that there has to be some kind of very strong support from the environment in order for a person to be able to perceive things this way. Suppose this way people wouldn't have any complaints against everyone, their spouse, the government, the whatever. We'd only be engaged in correcting ourselves. Yeah? And this is possible only in an environment that understands this, and yes, it's not for all people, and in every generation there are few such people. But it's not something that a person's born with. You can teach that to any person if there's the right environment. Actually, yes, but still, there are people that are born with an inclination toward changing themselves and examining the world as if through others. For this, he has to rise above his own ego. He has to acquire a quality of love and connection toward others, with others, and people that are in the same direction, not some felons or something. And only this way will he be able to see the world through different eyes, not through his egoistic eye. Well, this is separate subject. We'll talk about this. It's called perception of reality. But if from morning till evening there will be constant ads that are anti-egoistic, will it influence a person? Depends what kind of ads, what kind of advertisements. A person, first of all, has to see that this is something that's beneficial for him. Well, like there are different advertisements that tell us that we should buy a new iPhone every year and so on. The very same way, there will be anti-egoistic advertisements. But who's going to order them? The government? This is another question. You understand that in this kind of advertisement, you have to see that this is the style of people that live in prison, and this is the life of people that are ill, and this is these, and this is those, meaning to see the outcome of all bad habits and actions of people. Women, men, adults, even children, for all levels. It's a serious program of education. But theoretically, is it possible? Will there be such society? There were such societies where this was considered as something lowly. I think it's necessary to do this, but who's going to do this? This is a question. There is nothing more important to a person than public opinion or the opinion of his environment. How is public opinion formed? Through the mass media, but it's in the hands of the rich. how will they be able to propagate anti-egoistic values? This is a question standing before us in the post-coronavirus era. Meaning they're trying to lead us back to a consumeristic environment. They have no other choice. What will they be left with? People, if they start enjoying normal consumption, then 80% of what humanity is making will be unnecessary and they'll stop making it. And of course, the air will become cleaner, it will preserve nature, it will be easier for all of us and cooler or warmer, whatever we need. It will be much more comfortable to live in this kind of environment. But what will the bosses get rich off? So it's a closed cycle. Sometimes you're saying, look, people don't learn anything, the virus over, and everyone's going back to their imaginary businesses. Public opinion did not change, and public opinion is in the hands of the mass media, and the mass media is in the hands of the rich, and they don't want to change these values. They want to keep making money. So what's the way out? People aren't to blame. How can a person change society? Society has to work on its mistakes. So what is society if so? Meaning people have to understand that going back to the past is repeating the mistakes of the past. Repeating mistakes of the past, it's necessarily in this order to bring ourselves to a greater crisis. So any individual person can't acknowledge this. Only if society acknowledges this. Every individual person then has to vote for a certain party, for a certain government that will support it this way. They have to take to the streets, demonstrate. But this is after society will influence him through public opinion. Yes. So I'm saying public opinion is in the hands of mass media. The mass media is in the hands of the rich. It's a closed circle. No, we're saying that society now went through a certain period, it went through a certain blow, crisis. And now they have to learn something from this crisis. So you think that suffering nonetheless made some changes in man? Undoubtedly, gradually, at least if society will not change itself, then it will become more open to there appearing such more, but okay. Meaning we then have to, what can you do? You can't do anything here. It's only propagating the methodology. Okay, I understand. So you answered that this closed cycle, we can break it by suffering. And suffering is the beginning, starting point of this when does a person have to follow the majority and when does he have to follow the opinion of a single person? I don't think that there is such a thing as these concepts as individuals or group where the mass media has such tremendous power. Meaning, whoever has these means in his hands, the future of society and humanity is in their hands. So, the regime, different regimes understood this a long time ago, and it's all bought, bribed. This on the one hand, what a person in this world would like to have in his hands. On the other hand, the world is advancing according to a certain system. And now we see, as we're coming out of the coronavirus, that nature is not allowing us to go back to the past. Past manufacturing and relationships, this all has to change. What changes is man, and he will not aspire to the previous states like the rich and the regime would like people to go back to. So They'll change due to certain external factors. Not necessarily external factors, but it already exists in society. It's like with this virus. No one could imagine that such changes would happen. Yeah, wherever it came from, we could blame them or whatever, but it's not about that. The thing is that the real reason is higher than higher than our nature, higher than what we're familiar with. This kind of virus had to come since humanity has already brought itself to a state that the crisis had to come. Is it correct to use polls in order to take decisions? Actually, yes. Actually, at least polls show whether the opinion of society is worked on correctly, and after all that happens with society and everything, and what they're fed with, what do they eventually decide? This is what polls show. So this information is very important. Is it correct or not? That's something else. Next question. The environment influences us people through three channels. One is the mass media, the other is the people that are around me, and the third is through thoughts and desires. Today there are such researchers that obviously that we're all in one system, on one planet, we're all interconnected. We talked about this, and obviously through our thoughts we influence each other. Which of the factors is more influential from the three I mentioned? The strongest factor of influence over a person is the environment, meaning the examples that he sees from other people. It's the examples, it's the opinion. People can only change their attitude toward the world, but is this enough? Or do we have to change the world nonetheless, or is it enough to only change our attitudes? Our attitude toward the world or the world itself we can't change. We can change our attitude toward the world and then we'll see a different world. From your point of view, is there such a concept as an objective and a subjective opinion? Or is a person's opinion always subjective? Yes, this is correct. A person's opinion is always subjective, but we can change ourselves and accordingly to change our opinion and the world that we live in. Are you familiar with methods that allow people to read other people's minds? Is it possible? Only if I can really work on myself in such a way that I as if become the other person. As if the other person. Meaning, his desires, his yearning, aspiration, when I'm in touch with him, when I shift myself into his condition, or as if copy him on myself, then this way I can determine his thoughts and desires. But this is non-simple work. For this I have to constantly lower myself. I have to really try and clothe the other person. But there is such a possibility to read other people's minds. Of course. Then I no longer read his thoughts, but my own. All this sounds like I have to clothe in him. I have to accept him as something better than myself. And then I will feel the world through him as if. Last question. If you had the opportunity to give such a vaccine against the ego, so that all people will start, like you said, leading the social way of life, considering that society is higher than themselves, would you use this kind of opportunity to give this kind of vaccination, or a person has to come to this consciously? By no means would I do it, because killing the ego is to simply kill off our entire nature. To make a person good without him fighting his ego means to simply make him an idiot, good, naive, and so on. A person has to teach himself, rise above his own ego. It's tremendous work that a person doesn't finish even within one lifetime, but several lifetimes. So here we can't interfere with nature. We'll simply take away from a person the most precious thing that he has, which is his ego, and the opportunity to independently decide what his freedom of choice is and how to work with it. Thank you very much for this talk, and until next time, all the best.